And Lydia, you are up.
Okay, thank you, Beth. I'm going to start with sharing my screen here. Okay, so I'm just going to start with an overview of the stabilization services data collection process. Then I'll go over some frequently asked questions and then hand it over to you all for individual questions you might have. And again, Beth has sent out these resources in that all-encompassing what to know about stabilization services data collection. So you guys should have all these forms and then also a previous recording of a complete training I have done in the past, because this will be just more of an overview. So I first want to just start with this process. If you do the mobile crisis data collection and submission, which, like Beth said, all counties in Oregon are currently doing. This is the same process. You're going to be collecting data in a data entry template, a big Excel spreadsheet, submitting that to OHSU on a quarterly basis, and then we'll be creating individualized reports for you and your program. That being said, the data that we're collecting for stabilization services is different than that spreadsheet for mobile crisis. So just to talk about the components of the stabilization services data collection, there's an enrollment form and a closure form. And something that's different is that we're also collecting the Ohio scales, which are some additional scores that you all will be collecting at enrollment and discharge. So I'm going to switch my screen quickly. Look, my Teams is frozen, Beth. I'm going to need to re-sign on to share my screen again. Sorry. I don't know what's going on here.
Okay, you can do that, or you can email me your slide deck and I can try and pull it up for you, whatever works. I think she's going to sign off and come back in. All right, I sent out the email to those that asked for the data to be sent. And Lydia's gonna join us back.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll just stick with sharing my one guide here. Okay, so this enrollment form, I was discussing the enrollment form and the Ohio scales and the closure form. So these, all of that data in all of those forms can be found in the data entry spreadsheet, which I will show you as we move down this template. Or our team has also created individual copies of the enrollment form, which looks like this. This is something you could print out if you wanted to be filling this out while you were speaking with a family, and then put this data into the data entry template after the fact. So this is the example of the enrollment form. And then this is the example of the closure form. So again, all those data points can also just be entered directly into the spreadsheet if you don't find it helpful to be filling them out on a printed piece of paper. So now I'm going to talk about the Ohio scales. So these are standardized scales that are collected at enrollment and discharge, and it's really a way to measure progress that the youth has made. So there's a caseworker version, a parent version, and a youth version. And there are 4 different scores that we will be collecting in the data entry template. So the first one is the problem severity score. And this is a scale that the parent, youth, and clinician complete. We're only collecting the total score for this scale, so that's, you can see where that would be found on the sheet. The roll score we are not collecting. You're welcome to do that for your own processes if that's helpful, but we will not be collecting that. Then the hopefulness scale is just completed by the caregiver and the youth, and we are only collecting the total score for this scale. Then the satisfaction scale is also only completed by the caregiver and the youth, and we will be collecting the item level data for this scale. So this is the only scale where we're collecting the answer to every question. And that will be very clear in the data entry template because there's a clear spot to input all of those numbers. And then lastly, we're collecting the functioning scale, and that is completed by the clinician, parent, and youth. And we're only collecting the total score for this scale. So one thing that's important to note about the Ohio scales is we're collecting them at enrollment and discharge. However, we're not collecting the closure scores if the youth hasn't been enrolled for at least 30 days. And that's just because they may not have been able to really make any meaningful changes in less than that time. So you only need to complete the Ohio scales at closure if the youth has been enrolled for more than 30 days. Another thing I'll just touch on now is, of course, it can be hard. I know a lot of programs have struggled to get youth and their parents to complete these scores. It's typically easier to get them at enrollment, and then closure, it can be harder to follow up. So we really just ask that you all do the best that you can collecting these scores. And if you're not able to get a total score from a family or youth on any given scale, that's okay. We just ask you leave that piece of data blank. Okay, so then that brings me to the closure form, which we talked about. It's just the basic questions about the services that were provided. Okay, and then the final part of the data collection that our team, that is different than mobile crisis, is the youth and family survey. So this is a survey that we send out after we receive discharge data from the youth who's been enrolled in stabilization services. And so there is this letter that we ask you give to families and youth after they've been discharged, so that they're aware that they might receive a survey to anonymously report their experience in the program. So then the final step of this whole process is submitting the data to OHSU. So I was talking about the data entry template before. This is kind of what it looks like. And as you can see, there's a intake tab on the bottom where we put the intake data, and then a discharge tab on the bottom where all the discharge data goes. And then the third tab is the data dictionary. If there's ever confusion about a certain data point, you can find the definition to all the possible responses as well as the data point in the data dictionary. And then those Ohio scales I was talking about, all the way at the end of both the intake and discharge tabs is the place to enter those Ohio scales scores. So once the quarter ends and you've completed the intake tab and the discharge tab for all of the youth that your programs have served that quarter, you will then submit it to our team at OHSU. So there is a secure OneDrive folder. Some of you may already have access to it through Mobile Crisis, but if you do not have access, you'll have to email. You can email me directly or email stabilizationservicesinfo@ohsu.edu, and I will provide you access with the OneDrive folder so that you can securely upload your program's data. Again, as your team gets their data collection going, I'll be sending out reminders when data is due. and following up if I was expecting a submission from your program and we haven't yet received one. And I'm just going to go over some tips or common things that we see that can cause some issues when completing this data entry template. So the first thing is the data entry template is filled with data validated cells. So there's drop-down options in most of the cells, and we just ask that you use those drop-down options and not type in your own information. We need to use the data validated options. And then please reference the data dictionary if you're ever confused about a particular data point, or you can always email my team if there's additional questions. This is really important. Please make sure that all of the date fields are completed for both the enrollment and the discharge data. So that's the enrollment date, the final date of services, the date of data entry, and then the date of birth. All of the dates are really critical so that our team is working to match these enrollments with mobile crisis data. So we're trying to match the initial crisis with the stabilization services record, and we really need the dates to do that accurately. The dates also really help with understanding the length of services, and it's just really difficult for us to track the information when the dates are not included. One last thing I'll add that's not listed here is sometimes we've had programs have some confusion about if someone is enrolled in stabilization services, for example, at the end of a quarter, and then their discharge is in the following quarter. We only want you to have one enrollment and one discharge for every youth that you all serve. So please do not re-record an enrollment if you've previously recorded it in the following quarter if they're discharged in that quarter. That may sound confusing, but to just think about it this way, just please make sure you're only including one enrollment and one discharge, and it doesn't matter if they're across 2 different quarters. So then this final step, like I talked about, this is kind of what it looks like when you get access to the OneDrive folder. You'll get an email that says, Lydia Maitland has shared a folder with you. Then we have all the folders broken down by year and quarter, and you'll upload your spreadsheet into the correct quarter. And if you have any questions about if we received your data, feel free to email us and we can confirm. So then down here, we just have the reporting timeline. So right now we're coming to the end of quarter one. March 30th is the end of quarter one. And so that data will be due to OHSU by April 30th. This needs to be updated. So that will be coming up soon. So then this last step is receiving the quarterly report. This is what the Stabilization Services quarterly report will look like. And as long as you all submit more than 5 enrollments, you'll receive a full report. So I'm going to go over some of the common questions we've received about Stabilization Services data collection and then hand it over to you all. So this first one we talked about briefly. Do we have to complete the Ohio scales if the youth was enrolled for less than 30 days? And the answer is no. You always need to complete them at intake, but you only need to complete them at closure if the youth was enrolled for more than 30 days. Another common question we get is, what if the youth is outside of the validated age range? So the Ohio scales do have an age range, and if the youth is outside of that age range, we really just ask you all to use your best clinical judgment. We will always accept the scores, and even if they're for a youth outside of the age range, if we're doing more formal analyses, we can always exclude those youth. Another question we get about the Ohio scales is some of the questions don't feel like they don't apply to younger youth, for example. One about developing relationships with boyfriends or girlfriends, and another one about work. And here, this is right from the Ohio Scales manual. They just ask that the rater should rate okay if they're unsure, or rate the youth based on what might be expected for their developmental level. So, for example, a developmentally appropriate vocational preparation for a 7-year-old might be schoolwork or other work-like assignments. Yeah. So then some more questions. Where can we find the Ohio Scales in alternative languages? So on the Ohio Scales website, you can find the Ohio Scales in 6 different languages to be shared with parents and youth. And that is, the Ohio Scales website is linked in the data collection guide, and you can always email my team if you're having issues accessing it. What to do if a parent or guardian or youth skips a question on the Ohio scale. So, like I said earlier, this can happen a lot. We know that it can be hard to get people to complete these forms. And we ask if a parent or youth skips a question on the scale, we ask that you all do your best to get them to complete that question. If they still aren't completing it, we don't want it to be marked as 0 because that will throw off the accuracy of the scale. So when we're collecting the total scale, if there's missed questions, we can't include those scores. However, for the satisfaction score, where we're collecting those individualized responses, you can just leave the score blank if they miss one of the questions. So those are the main questions we get a lot. I'm gonna open it up to you all now for any individual questions you all might have.
Thanks, Lydia. Couple things while you guys are sort of digesting all of that is that the Ohio scales, we did choose the Ohio scales just because a lot of youth who enter into MRSS who need intensive services often then go into our IIBHT program, and we do use the Ohio scales in that program. So we were trying to use something that's going to be familiar with a lot of your teams already. The other thing about the Ohio is it's really meant to give you information to help you with those short-term goals that you're going to come up with. Right now, a lot of you I've talked to is that when kids are in stabilization services, yes, it's a 2-month, around 2 months, they can be in that service while you're helping to sort of assess and figure out what this youth and their family needs to be successful. If they're in there, you have to have a short-term treatment plan. And so the Ohio scales are supposed to help you figure out what do we need to focus on in the next 2 months and what would our goals be. A lot of times the goals are going to be, really assessing and figuring out what they need. So the Ohios are just an evidence-based pre and post that we're trying to collect for the youth. But the other documents are just similar questions. They're questions about the youth who are entering, so that we can really look at the demographics and look at who these youth are, and seeing if we're helping them be able to actually connect to the services. And again, all of this stuff is going into roads and is slated to start being collected in roads. So this spreadsheet that you guys are submitting to OHSU is just our workaround until you're all up and running in roads, which should be happening in the next couple months from my understanding. Questions? Most of you are submitting spreadsheets and sort of laying out, that's what you're doing in MCIS. There's a similar spreadsheet. This one just has different questions on it. So curious. Anyone? Hi, Rick. I can't send you the documents. Sorry about that. It's too big and I tried to break them up, but I'm working on it.
I got part 2.
Oh, you did? Okay, well then I'll go back. Part one must have just been too big.
Yeah. Just quick question. So just making sure we're on the same page regarding admitting into YSS and what the level of assessment is needed. So if a mobile crisis team, QMHP does the crisis assessment, is that enough of an assessment in order to have YSS services initiated?
I would think so, but I'd have to look at I would have to look at what's in your crisis or to be 100% sure. But yes, a lot of the organizations, the assessment that's done on the scene during the first 72 hours is sufficient to call, that's a sufficient document to then to then create a service plan. The service plan, though, then would say what services so that you can then, of course, track it with your billing, right? So the service plan still has to have goals, objectives, so that you, if you're using a skills trainer or the family support, we want to make sure that you can still bill for those services, which is why the service plan. I have gotten feedback about when we open the rules the next time, let's get rid of the need for a service plan and just do a stabilization plan and make it like make the requirements minimal.
Okay, yep, that sounds good.
Yeah, but yeah, most of what you're doing in the initial mobile crisis response, and don't forget to use those Z codes if you're going out and you don't feel like you have a diagnosis, you also have the Z codes to mess with now, given
Right.
EPSDT. So maybe you have a history of X, Y, and Z, and you can choose because the diagnosis, but we also have the Z codes, parent-child conflict is one of them. There's also a lot around recent abuse or neglect or things like that too. So even if they don't have one of our standards, you might then decide during the assessment, like once the child's enrolled, they may need a full biopsychosocial for you to really dig in. But that's the wonder of having that QMHP be available to do a deeper dive with the youth and family if need be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Great
Thanks.
question though, Rick. And then the Ohio scales again, I know it's a lot because we're asking the youth and the parent to fill out one. Again, thinking about not so much the crisis, thinking really about how much once you have this family, the team that's going in, these Ohio scales are really meant for the team going in who's going to be working with this family for possibly 2 months. And remember, that might even go longer if the child doesn't have the services. So these documents are meant to be helpful for you. What does the kid see as the issues versus the parents? What are you going to do with your time with this family? And that hopefully those documents are not just like getting filled out and like never used again, that some of the documented information on it might be helpful for you to have when you're thinking about how to spend and how to collaborate with that family for the next 2 months. Yeah. I can't see, I can only, there's so many people here, I only can see one row. Uh, what are other people? The other nice thing, and not all of you have seen this, is Lydia's team creates a program specific report that you then get back at the end of the quarter. And that report, for those of you who are getting them for MCIS already, you guys are getting reports. This is the same thing, but it's a breakdown for stabilization services. And it's a really nice look at who are these youth and what's going on and how are we, I don't know. I think hopefully they can be used for quality improvement discussions in your community. If you're seeing a lot of youth that have never been in services, who are these kids? What's going on? And helps you sort of look at the not just the symptoms of the youth, but also looks at the demographics and the ages and other things that hopefully might be helpful.
I also just want to add for everybody, if you end this meeting and you're feeling totally lost when you go to start the data collection, Beth put our email in here, stabilizationservicesinfo@OHSU. I monitor that email as well as the mobile crisis email. So if you have any questions about anything, please just email our team. I'm also happy to set up quick meetings with you all if you want to just talk through something. So please do not hesitate to reach out.
All right. Any other questions? Lydia, the one thing I was going to say, I know you told them is if they don't want to keep another thing in their head, they can do the Ohio for the youth, regardless of what age, if they think it's appropriate. But what is the actual cutoff? Because I think it might be easier just for a lot of these folks to say, this is the age it's valid for. Don't worry about it if it's a younger youth, because it's not valid. So can you remind us again what the age group is for the youth?
Yes, I believe it's 12 is the youngest age. I'll
Okay.
have to double check, but it's, I think, 12. So there could be a good amount of youth under that age that you all
Yeah.
might be serving. But again, regardless, you can still complete them, or if you feel like that's not appropriate, you do not have to.
Yeah. And again, if you're asking yourself, why would I complete it if it's not valid? I just, again, from the clinical side, there may be questions on there that are helpful for you to know. And we all know that some youth prefer to fill out paperwork rather than telling you verbally. So it's just another way to be able to maybe get some information, even if it's not 100% evidence-based and we're not going to put it into the overall system. When we're looking at statistics, it may still be some helpful questions on there. The other thing that comes up, and I get a lot of emails about, is who can actually do these documents with the youth and their family. And I think it's a team. It's your team. It's a team approach often. Sometimes the skills trainers that are assigned to work with the youth are filling out the youth, take the youth one. 12 to 18 is the range. So for the youth one. So if the kids are younger than 12 or over 18, you don't need to worry about that one unless there's questions on it that you think would be helpful. But again, why would you fill it out? I forget. I lost my train of thought when I got sidetracked by the. Any other questions? Oh, who can fill out? Sorry, it is Monday we lost an hour of sleep, so I apologize. Who can fill it out? The skills trainer can sit with a youth and if you guys want to have the youth or the skills trainer fill out the youth version, that's okay. If you want the family support specialist to sit with the family and go over it, that's okay. Or the clinician might decide to do all of the versions. The one that says worker, though, is the one that the QMHP fills out. So the QMHP does have to fill out one, although you guys also know that QMHAs can help QMHPs gather information. So again, you guys have some leeway on those documents.